Bradley has gone to sleep at long last. I watched him slumber on the couch, stroking his head as he slept the sleep of the exhausted and the dead. I feel awful for what I must do now, but it's for the best. Bradley wouldn't understand what lies beyond the corn, what lies within the field. He thinks the green is something to be feared. Bradley was always such a fearful child. I want all of my children to have a place within the green, but Bradley is old enough to make his own choice. He must choose to come to him on his own, if he will. I feel bad for leaving him. I feel bad for using his trusting nature against him, but it was the only way. Bradley would never let me leave on my own. So, sitting in the mud, feeling his tears stain my dress, I felt a sudden ebb in my rage. This was my boy. This was my first and oldest child, and I was hurting him like some kind of psychopath. The way to break free was not by means of violence, but through love. So I pulled him up and took him inside. The green could wait a little longer. I had known what I must do and where I must go since I saw them from the porch. My precious Thomas, my loving husband, Greg, my boy, who knew the way all along. He had made the path very clear. I was unsure. The path was still new to me, so I had turned away. That night, however, as I lay in bed, the voices of the crops made my purpose clear. The green man wanted us all, wanted to reward us for tending his fields and taking care of his harvest. The field would accept us, change us, make us ready to become part of the green. I lay in bed for hours, listening to the scarecrows, the voices of the field, and all was made clear. But as clear as the path was, Bradley refused to see it. I knew then and there that I would have to leave him behind, but I could do it kindly. A mother never wants to hurt her children if she can help it. He will have to come before the altar all of his own. When we returned to the house, I asked him if he'd like some pork chops for dinner. Pork chops and mashed potatoes are Bradley's favorite, and I cooked peas and greens to go with them. He was ravenous. He hadn't eaten more than canned goods for days, and I knew that a big meal would make him happy. I dug out the big skillet and got the pork chops from the icebox. He came to help me peel potatoes, mashing them into a bowl as he added water and salt. I took some peas from the freezer, along with collard greens and a half-eaten pie I had forgotten about. All the while, as I cooked and chatted and listened to Bradley's chatter, the voice of the green called to me. They were like wasps flying around a hive. I could feel the voices cascading over me as they tried to convince me to leave the boy and come to the field. My face was a mask of serenity, but my mind was divided, constantly at odds with itself. Leave him behind. I plated the chops and watched the potatoes so they wouldn't scorch. He is unworthy of the green. I shook the water from the greens and put them on the plate next to the potatoes. The juice from the greens would run into the potatoes, and I knew that was just how Bradley liked it. The voices were making my hands shake, but I wanted to make tonight special. I was his mother, and what I was getting ready to do would hurt him a lot. He wouldn't understand, but he could at least have one last happy memory of me. Come to the green! Come to the green! Come to the green! He looked confused as I set the plate in front of him, cocking his head as the food steamed and the aromas tickled his nose. Where's your plate? I froze. I hadn't thought of that. I didn't really feel hungry. I hadn't felt hungry in days, and it seemed that only the voices sustained me. When was the last time I had taken a drink? I thought to myself. Had I gone to the bathroom today? These questions seemed to push against the voices, but the voices shouted them down, telling me that the green was all I needed. The green would protect me. The green would sustain me. The green would make all my questions go away. Oh, I'm not hungry. It's just been too much of an exciting day, and my stomach's in a knot, I told him. He clearly wanted to question this, but the smell of the chops was too enticing. He fell on the food like a hungry dog, mopping up the mashed potatoes with a piece of pork chop, moving the potatoes around to get the juice from the greens, and generally enjoying everything. I watched him eat, smiling at his enjoyment. Bradley was Always my easiest child. Greg was a good boy, but he could be headstrong, like his father. Thomas was still small and prone to tantrums and grumpy spells. Bradley, however, had always taken after me. He was always there to help with the others, always there to help his father, not prone to feeling like a sissy if he helped Mama with the house chores. He smiled a lot, and he had not been prone to the sullenness boys sometimes got at his age. I reached out and touched his flax-colored hair, so similar to mine, and felt a tear slide down my cheek. "What's wrong, Mama?" he asked, looking up at me with the piece of pork chop half in his mouth. I smiled and tucked his hair behind his ear. Nothing, baby. That hair's getting a little long. Maybe after dinner I could cut it for you." He nodded, thanking me as he tucked into the remains of dinner. It was getting dark outside, what little daylight we had already slipping away. The green called to me, begging me, trying to threaten me, but I soothed it, even as I watched Bradley sop up the last of his food with a piece of bread. I had my whole life within the green. What was a few more hours with my son? We sat in the kitchen as I pulled a sheet around him and took out my scissors and my razor. We usually did this sort of thing on the front porch, but for obvious reasons, that would have been a mistake. Bradley would start shaking if he had to look at that sea of corn as it stretched out before him, and there would be no way I could deny the green if it were so close. So we sat inside, listening to the rain fall as I neatened his hair for him. Like mine, it was fine and soft, not a hint of coarseness to it, and I wondered if some girl had ever slid her fingers through it as they sat together. Had he ever kissed a girl? Held her hand? Told her he loved her? The hair fell down, making the sheet look dirty, as Bradley sat dutifully and let me work. He was so trusting, so oblivious to the tug-of-war that was taking place in my mind. The scissors made a snick, snick, snick sound as I cut, and if he noticed my hands shaking, he never commented on it. My mind was trembling, a mass of thoughts and voices, and I had to steady my scissors more than once before I could plunge them into his neck and end this charade. He was my son. I had carried him for 9 months, and these voices, this green god, would have me throw all of that away and go dance in the fields. It kept sending me images of the corn swaying around me, and I felt the stalks beneath my fingers. The soil was wet and soothing as it oozed between my toes. The rain was warm, possessing none of the autumn chill I had felt earlier, and as I spun like a child at play beneath it, the soil opened up and took me into its loving ouch! Bradley put a hand up to his ear and turned back to look at me. I hadn't cut him badly, just a nick, but I'd stepped back as my hands began to tremble again. He pulled his fingers away, revealing a little blood, but not too much. I grabbed a towel from beside the sink and held it there, telling him I was sorry and how I hadn't meant to cut him. He just smiled. "It's okay, Mama. It's been a pretty trying day." I finished his haircut, and he admired himself in the mirror afterwards. All I could see was the ugly cut on his ear, and my shame kept the voices away for a few minutes. As he showered, I sat on the couch and twisted my dress in my hands. It was worse now. It always got worse at night, and the multitudes were calling me home again. The scarecrows were calling me. Dale was calling me. Greg and Thomas were calling me. They were all calling, and I felt as if I must go mad soon. It was too much. They were too much, and I didn't know how much longer I could sit here and deny them. My mind would unravel, as it had earlier, and I would be forced to go. They would make me leave, and there was nothing I could do about it. I was too weak to resist, too weak to do anything but give in, and then I would go to the green. And once there, I would be green eternal. The shower stopped, and I steadied myself as he came out. He mustn't see how rattled I was, or he would get suspicious. He walked to his room, and I hoped for a second that he would just go to bed. Once he was asleep, then I could leave. Once he was unconscious, I could slip away without this myriad of questions. He was tired. We were both tired, and after such a big meal, perhaps he might just go to... "Mama?" I looked up to find him standing there, washed and pajamaed, holding something I hadn't seen in a long time. I know it's kind of babyish, but could you read to me? Like you did when I was small? I was speechless. He was holding a storybook, something I had read to all my kids, and looking at me bashfully. I had read them bedtime stories for years, but Bradley hadn't asked since he was 10. He would sometimes stand in the doorway as I read to his brothers, seeming to revel in the nostalgia of these old stories, and to have him ask for a story seemed to push the voices away again. He sat beside me on the couch, and I read him old tales of dark woods and fair princes, evil witches and beautiful princesses, where the endings were always happy and the heroes always won. He laid his head on my shoulder, much as he had done when he was small, and I saw him struggling to stay awake as the words wove a spell around him. His eyes were getting heavy, his body growing tired, and slowly his head became heavier and heavier as it pressed against me. When he began to snore, I went on reading to the end of the story. Then I laid him against a pillow, pulled the scratchy old comforter over him, and sat down to write this. I didn't want to leave without a word, as Dale had. I know this will be hard for Bradley, but I want him to know that I'm not abandoning him because of something he did. None of this is his fault, and I hope that he too can find his way into the green. I want my family to be complete within his halls, and I want all of us to be reunited beyond the veil. Come to the green, Bradley. Come be with your family again. Now I'm off to the fields. The earth calls to me, and I can no longer deny its clarion call. I return to the soil. Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for joining me for tonight's story. This is night 6 of our Towesey Hall series, and I hope you've enjoyed hearing it as much as I've enjoyed reading it. It's Friday, so that means only 2 stories left. We're coming to the end now. Halloween will soon be upon us, and I sincerely hope that you are enjoying the season as much as I am. Before we go, it's time to thank our patrons. Thanks again to Leslie Lou Riddle for being part of our Spooky Skeleton Army. Thanks, Leslie. I couldn't do it without you. If you too would like to be a spooky skeleton in this, the spookiest season of the year, come on down to Patreon. For just $5 a month, you too can support this channel and have your name read out at the end of every video. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening and a spooky Halloween.